The air in the bar was thick with the smell of stale beer and fried food, a familiar aroma that usually meant comfort. Tonight, it felt heavy, suffocating. The bass from the jukebox thumped against my ribs, a rhythm out of sync with the nervous flutter in my chest. I stood just inside the doorway of the Anchor, my dress blues feeling stiff and new, the dark fabric a stark contrast to the worn wood and neon signs. I'd been a Marine for all of 3 weeks, and this was my first night of real leave, my first time wearing the uniform out in the world for something other than travel. Luke was already at a high-top table near the back, a bottle of beer in front of him. He saw me and a slow, proud smile spread across his face. My brother, Lucas Vance, a corporal, a man who had seen things I couldn't yet imagine, was smiling at me like I'd finally done something worthwhile. He raised his bottle in a small salute. I started to weave through the crowd, my focus entirely on him, on that hard-won approval. I didn't see the obstacle until I walked right into him, or rather, until he stepped deliberately into my path. He was a mountain of a man, clad in a black security shirt stretched taut over a barrel chest. A name tag, slightly crooked, read Derek. "Whoa there, little lady." His voice was a low rumble, a patronizing tone that made my skin prickle. "The all-ages arcade is down the street." I took a half-step back, my posture instinctively straightening. "I'm meeting my brother," I said, gesturing towards Luke, who was now watching us, his smile gone, replaced by a wary tension. Derek Bull, as I'd later learn the regulars called him, followed my gaze and gave a dismissive snort. His eyes, small and set deep in a fleshy face, traveled down my frame, a slow, insulting inspection that made me feel like a specimen. He was taking in every inch of me, the crisp lines of my uniform, the sharp creases in my trousers, and most of all, my size. At 5'2" and 110 pounds, I was used to being the smallest person in the room. But I wasn't used to having my worth measured by it in a place like this, not while wearing this uniform. "Cute costume," he said, his lip curling. "But you're gonna need a better fake ID than that. This is a real bar for real adults." A hot flush crept up my neck. "It's not a costume, I'm a United States Marine." The words felt solid and true on my tongue, a declaration I'd dreamed of making for years. But they hung in the air between us, and then he laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was a harsh, barking sound that cut through the music and drew the attention of a few people nearby. "A Marine," he boomed, loud enough for the whole front of the bar to hear. "You, honey, I was Army, 2 years at Fort Benning. I know what a soldier looks like. I've seen recruits come and go. You," he leaned in closer, his breath smelling of cheap coffee and mint. "You look like a strong wind would knock you on your ass. They'd use you for a jump prop. What'd you do? Win a raffle." The laughter around us spread, nervous and uncertain at first, then more open as Bull played to his audience. My face was on fire. I could feel the eyes of strangers, their gazes picking me apart. I saw the doubt in their expressions, the same doubt I'd faced my entire life, now magnified and put on public display. My hard-won confidence, the pride that had filled me just moments ago, began to crack like thin ice. "Check her record, Masterson," Luke's voice cut through the noise, cold and sharp. He was beside me now, his own dress blues radiating an authority that mine clearly lacked. He was taller, broader, everything a Marine was supposed to look like. "She's my sister. She's earned it." Bull turned his sneer on Luke. "Vance should have known. Look, I don't care if she's your sister or the commandant's daughter. She doesn't meet the physical requirements for this establishment." He smirked, pleased with his own wit. "Policy, no kids without a parent. And you," he said, looking back at me, "you're too small to be a Marine. It's a fact. Go home and play dress-up." The world seemed to shrink to the space between his mocking eyes and my burning ears. The sounds of the bar faded into a dull roar. Too small. The words echoed, not just his, but a chorus of voices from my past, all culminating in one moment, 6 months ago, in my parents' cluttered kitchen. The smell of coffee and bacon had been comforting that morning, a stark contrast to the tension simmering across the linoleum table. Luke was home on leave, his presence filling the small room. He was telling a story about a training exercise, his hands moving to illustrate the weight of a pack, the kick of a rifle. I waited for a lull, my own news sitting in my stomach like a stone. "I enlisted," I said, the words coming out in a quiet rush. The room went silent. My mother stopped wiping the counter. My father lowered his newspaper. Luke stared at me, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. "You what?" he finally asked, his tone flat. "I enlisted, in the Marines. I leave for Paris Island in 3 weeks." He put his fork down carefully. "Ellie, no, you didn't." "I did. I went to the recruiter's office yesterday. I signed the papers." He shook his head, a familiar, frustrated gesture I'd seen my whole life. "Why? For what? To prove something? To who?" "To myself," I said, my voice gaining a little steel. "You did it." "It's different," he said, his voice rising. "Look at you. You're what, 100 pounds soaking wet. The Marines are, it's not for you. It's not some game, some way to get back at me for leaving. It's hard, Ellie. It's designed to break people bigger and stronger than you." "I'm stronger than I look," I shot back, the old defiance rising. "This isn't about wrestling with your brothers in the backyard," he snapped. "This is about carrying a 100-pound pack for 20 miles. It's about pulling yourself over a wall. It's about people screaming in your face until you forget your own name. You think you're stubborn? They'll eat that stubbornness for breakfast and spit out the bones." "Luke," my mother said softly, a warning in her voice. "No, Mom, she needs to hear this," he said, turning his intense gaze back to me. "I love you, Ellie. That's why I'm saying this. You're fragile, and there's no shame in that. But the drill instructors, they'll see it. They'll see you coming a mile away, and they won't stop until you're crying on the bus back home. Save yourself the humiliation." Fragile, the word was a slap. It was the opposite of everything I felt inside, everything I knew I could be. His protective skepticism felt like a cage. He had joined to get away from having to look after his little sister, and now that same little sister was following him into the one place he thought was his own. He couldn't see the resilience, only the frame it was packaged in. That same frame was the first thing Gunnery Sergeant Thorne's eyes locked onto, 6 months later, on a blistering hot afternoon at Paris Island. The South Carolina sun was a physical weight, pressing down on the freshly shaved scalp of every recruit standing at a semblance of attention on the yellow footprints. The air was a wet, heavy blanket smelling of asphalt, sweat, and fear. We were a collection of terrified civilians, a herd of mismatched souls, and I was, unmistakably, the smallest. The chaos had been immediate and overwhelming. From the moment the bus doors hissed open, men with faces of stone and voices like thunder had descended upon us, hurting, screaming, reducing grown men to stuttering children. We'd been processed, shorn, and issued ill-fitting gear, and now we stood waiting for the real storm to hit. Then he arrived. The other drill instructors seemed to part for him. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne moved with a predator's grace that was terrifying in a man his size. He was tall, with a lean, coiled strength that made the air around him crackle. His campaign hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, but I could feel his gaze sweeping over us, missing nothing. His voice, when he spoke, didn't need to be a scream. It was a low, controlled whip crack that carried over the entire formation, stripping away the last vestiges of our civilian composure. "You are nothing," he began, pacing slowly before us. "You are less than nothing. You are a smudge on the proud history of this nation, and it is my holy mission to either polish you into something that resembles a United States Marine or to wipe you away. There is no third option." His eyes scanned the ranks, and for a heartbeat, they paused on me. It was just a flicker, a momentary fixation on the smallest body in the formation. There was no curiosity in that glance, only a cold, analytical dismissal. It was the same look Luke had given me, the same look Bull Masterson was giving me now, the look that saw a body, not a person. A problem, not a potential. He saw a liability. He saw fragile. The memory of that first physical assessment is a blur of pain and shame. We were run through a series of basic tests, a brutal introduction to the standards we would have to meet. The pull-up bar was my nemesis. It hung there, a simple piece of steel, representing everything I lacked. I jumped, my hands gripping the cool metal, my knuckles white. I pulled with everything I had, every ounce of strength in my back, my arms, my core. My body trembled with the effort. I could feel the eyes of the other recruits, the impatient glare of the assistant drill instructor. I could feel Gunnery Sergeant Thorne's presence nearby, a silent monument to impossible standards. I managed to get my chin barely level with the bar, muscles screaming, before my strength gave out. I hung for a second, then dropped to the ground, my arms feeling like rubber. Failure. A single, pathetic repetition. 0, the DI barked, making a note on his clipboard. Vance Aliner, 0. From the corner of my eye, I saw a large recruit named Javier Rodriguez easily knock out 8 clean pull-ups. He glanced at me as he dropped down, his expression not unkind, but filled with a pity that was worse than contempt. It was the look you give a lost puppy. Another face in the platoon, another person who saw my size before they saw me. Later, as we were being marched to the squad bay, Gunnery Sergeant Thorne fell into step beside me for just a moment. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed ahead, but his words were meant for my ears alone, spoken in that low, devastating tone. "I don't know what quota you filled or who you know, recruit," he muttered, the words laced with ice. "But this platoon carries its own weight, every ounce of it. You will not be an exception. You will keep up or you will be left behind. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," I gasped, the response automatic. He moved on, leaving me with the crushing weight of his expectation and my own roaring doubt. Luke had been right. Thorne saw it. Everyone saw it. I was too small. The belief that had carried me here, the unyielding perseverance that was my core, felt like a flimsy shield against the reality of my own physical limitations. The memory of that failure was a cold splash of water. It was the same feeling I had now, standing in the stupid bar, being laughed at by a bloated bouncer who judged a person's worth by the pound. Bull Masterson's smug face was superimposed over the memory of Gunnery Sergeant Thorne's dismissive glare and Luke's frustrated concern. They were all the same voice, the same prophecy of my inevitable defeat. But something else surfaced with that memory. The heat of Paris Island, the burn in my muscles after a 10-mile run, the blisters on my feet, the feel of a rifle, cool and solid, settling into my shoulder until it became an extension of my own body. The sound of Thorne's voice, months later, no longer dismissive, but assessing. The humiliation Bull was dishing out was public and cruel, but it was an old song. I'd heard it before, and I'd proven it wrong. Luke was arguing with him, his voice tight with anger. "You're out of line, Masterson. I'll have your job for this." "For upholding policy," Bull said, spreading his hands wide. "Go ahead, but the little girl stays out." I looked past Bull's hulking form, past the smirking patrons, to my own reflection in the dark mirror of the bar window. I saw a young woman in a Marine uniform. I saw the same petite frame, the same intense blue eyes. But the eyes that looked back at me weren't just hiding a competitive spirit anymore. They were filled with the memory of 1,000 repetitions on the pull-up bar, the feel of a perfect shot grouping, the grit it took to march until your feet were raw. The reflection wasn't of someone who was too small. It was of someone who had already run a gauntlet far more punishing than this. The confidence that had been shaken by his mockery didn't return as a fragile thing. It solidified, forged in the memory of everything I had already endured. The gauntlet had been thrown, not just here tonight, but 6 months ago, and I had already begun to run it. The world ended at 4:30 a.m. in a blaze of fluorescent light and a sound that could crack concrete. It wasn't an explosion or an invasion. It was the door to my squad bay slamming open and the voice of Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne ripping the sleep from my bones. "Get on your feet, you piles of weak-holed garbage. The sun is burning a hole in the sky and you're still dreaming about your mommies. Move." My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird trying to escape a cage that suddenly felt terrifyingly small. I swung my legs over the side of the bunk, my feet hitting the cold, polished deck. All around me, a symphony of chaos erupted, grunts, curses, the frantic rustle of starched sheets. I was already in my PT shorts and shirt, a habit drilled into me over the last 3 weeks, a tiny sliver of control in a world designed to strip it all away. 3 weeks. It felt like 3 years. And this was only the beginning. Thorne was a force of nature, contained within a perfectly pressed utility uniform. He was taller than any of my brothers, with a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite and eyes that missed nothing. They scanned the room, and I swear I felt the heat of his gaze like a laser pointer on the back of my neck. He moved through the squad bay, his presence a physical pressure that made the air feel thick. "Vance," he barked, stopping directly in front of me. I snapped to attention, my gaze fixed on a point on the bulkhead behind him. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the faint scent of coffee and wintergreen on his breath. "You look like a lost kitten. You sure you're in the right place?" The USO show is next week. A few snickers rippled through the squad, my cheeks burned. Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. He straightened up, his voice booming again for all to hear. This is not a daycare. This is not a summer camp. This is Marine Corps Recruit Depot Paris Island, and I'm your god for the next 3 months. And I am a jealous god. I demand perfection. I will have perfection. Or I will break you into tiny, weeping pieces and mail you back to whatever pathetic corner of America you crawled out of. Is that understood? A ragged chorus of yes, Gunnery Sergeant, echoed back. I can't hear you, you whispering slugs. This time we screamed it, our voices raw. It was in that first hour, during the first frantic, disorganized run towards the grinder for PT, that I met Javier Rodriguez. He was a head taller than me and built like a refrigerator, all solid muscle and quiet intensity. In the pre-dawn gloom, as we stumbled into formation, my foot caught on an uneven piece of pavement. I pitched forward, but a large hand shot out and caught my arm, steadying me. Easy there, a low voice rumbled. I looked up into a broad, open face. Thanks. He just nodded, his expression grim. Save your breath, you're gonna need it. He wasn't wrong. The physical disparity was immediate and brutal. The runs were a special kind of hell. My legs were short, my stride a fraction of the bigger recruits. Every step was a fight to keep up, my lungs burning, my calves screaming. The obstacle course was a gauntlet of humiliation. The rope climb was a particular nemesis. I dangled like a fish on a line, my arms trembling with the effort of hauling all 110 pounds of me upwards, while others, like Javier, muscled their way to the top with grunting ease. During one march under the brutal South Carolina sun, my world shrank to the 30-pound pack digging into my shoulders and the burning in my thighs. The pack, designed for someone with a longer torso, felt like it was trying to push me into the asphalt. My steps began to falter, the gap between me and the recruit in front of me widening. A hot wave of despair washed over me. This was what Luke had been afraid of. This was what Derek Bull Masterson had seen. A girl playing dress-up doomed to fail. Then a presence was beside me. Javier, sweat streaming down his temple, didn't look at me. His hand, however, brushed against my pack, and I felt a sudden, significant shift in weight. He'd hooked a finger under the strap and was silently taking some of the load. Don't, I gasped, pride flaring. I can do it. I know you can, he muttered, his voice low so the DI wouldn't hear. But why waste all your energy on this? Save it for the range. You're a better shot than any of these clowns. He kept his finger hooked for another 50 yards, just enough to let me catch my breath and reset my stance, then melted back into his position. It wasn't pity. It was logistics. An unspoken recognition that we had different strengths, and in this place, you survived by forming alliances. Later, in the barracks during a rare moment of silence, I found him struggling to memorize the general orders, his brow furrowed in frustration. I slid onto the footlocker next to him. Here, I said quietly, for the third one, think of it like a chain of command. To quit my post only when properly relieved. It's about responsibility. You wouldn't just walk away from your spot in a formation, right? I used the same calm, methodical tone I'd used to teach myself to stay focused amidst the chaos of my brother's wrestling matches back home. He looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. A bond was forged in that exchange, not of grand declarations, but of quiet, mutual support. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne was a constant, oppressive force. His criticisms were razor-sharp and personal. Rodriguez, you move like a water buffalo with a sprained ankle. Vance, did you shrink in the wash? I can barely see you over the rifle. He was a master of finding the exact weakness in every recruit and exploiting it without mercy. But slowly, through the fog of exhaustion, I began to see a pattern, a cruel methodology. He wasn't just breaking us down. He was burning away everything non-essential, the ego, the whining, the fear, to see what core remained. He was looking for a spark that wouldn't go out. That spark, for me, was found on the rifle range. While the bigger recruits struggled with the recoil of the M16, fighting to control the weapon with brute force, I found a strange sense of peace. The rifle became an extension of my body, its weight familiar, almost comforting. The chaos of boot camp faded away when I slid into the prone position, my cheek resting against the stock. The world narrowed to the front sight post, the target, and the rhythm of my breathing. It was the same hyperfocus I'd used to block out the world while studying. the same stillness I'd cultivated to survive the good-natured but overwhelming tumult of my childhood home. On qualification day, the air was thick with tension. Thorn paced behind the firing line, his voice a low growl. "Steady, control your breathing, you control the weapon, don't let it control you." I saw a large recruit next to me, his knuckles white on the pistol grip, jerk the trigger. His shot went wide. Then it was my turn. Inhale, exhale, slow, the world disappeared. There was only the steady pressure of my finger, the gentle squeeze. Crack. The shot echoed, and through the scope, I saw the bullet punch a hole dead center in the target. Again, and again. The cacophony of other rifles faded into a distant hum. When the scores were posted, my name was at the top. Expert, the highest qualification. There were muttered comments, a few surprised glances in my direction. Thorn walked down the line, stopped at my target, and studied the tight grouping of holes. He didn't look at me, but he stood there for a long moment. He said nothing, but his silence was more potent than any praise he could have offered. It was the first time I felt seen, not for my size, but for my performance. It was after a particularly grueling day, with the platoon covered in mud and failure, that Thorn assembled us. We were a sorry sight, shoulders slumped, spirits broken. "I see a lot of big men here," Thorn began, his voice cutting through the evening humidity. "A lot of size, a lot of muscle, but size is useless if it's hollow. Muscle is worthless without the heart to drive it. The core isn't about being the biggest. It's about being the last one standing. It's about having a fire inside you that all the rain and mud and misery in the world cannot put out. I don't care if you're 6'5" or 4' nothing. I care about what's in here." He tapped his chest with a hard knuckle. "The day you quit is the day you prove you never had it to begin with." He wasn't looking at me. He was addressing the platoon. But his words sank into me, a validation I clung to. He was talking about heart. And mine, forged in a household of boys and tempered by a lifetime of being underestimated, was made of something that felt awfully close to steel. The culmination of it all was the 20-mile hike. It was scheduled for the end of the third month, a final gut check before we earned the title. The air was cool, a rare mercy, but the humidity was a suffocating blanket. The pack felt heavier than ever, the rifle a dead weight on my sling. We moved out before dawn, a long, grim column of souls. For the first 10 miles, it was a battle of attrition. Men began to fall out, stumbling to the side of the trail, vomiting, or just collapsing from exhaustion. Javier stayed near me, his breathing labored but steady. At the 15-mile mark, a wicked cramp seized my calf. A white-hot pain shot up my leg. I stumbled, biting my lip to keep from crying out. Javier was immediately there. "Ellie." "Cramp," I gasped. He didn't hesitate. He took my rifle, slinging it over his own shoulder alongside his. "Just keep moving, don't stop." It was the ultimate act of trust. I limped on, the pain a fiery brand in my muscle, but I kept putting one foot in front of the other. The column stretched and frayed. I lost sight of the leaders. All I could see was the boot prints of the person in front of me. My world became a tiny, painful universe of forward motion. I thought of Luke's skeptical face. I thought of Bull Masterson's condescending smirk. I thought of Gunny Thorne's implacable gaze. The images fueled a stubborn fire in my gut. I stopped feeling the pain. I entered a strange, trance-like state. My short legs found a rhythm, a relentless, punishing cadence that ate up the ground. I started passing people, first one, then another. Bigger men, their faces masks of agony, looked at me in disbelief as this 5'2" ghost trudged past them. I wasn't faster. I was just relentless. I refused to break. I saw the final checkpoint up ahead, a gathering of trucks and cadre. There was no one in front of me. My vision swam, spotted with black dots. With a final, shuddering effort, I crossed the line and my legs simply gave out. I collapsed onto the gravel, my chest heaving, my body trembling uncontrollably. Boots crunched near my head. I looked up, bleary-eyed. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne was standing over me. He wasn't yelling. He was just looking down, his expression unreadable. He watched me for what felt like an eternity as the rest of the platoon stumbled in behind me, Javier among them, his face etched with concern and awe. A corpsman approached with a canteen. "You okay, recruit? Need water." Before I could answer, Thorne spoke, his voice quiet, for the first time devoid of its customary fury. It was flat, factual. "She doesn't need it. Get it to someone who quit." The corpsman moved on. Thorne's eyes held mine for a second longer. There was no smile, no well done. But in that gaze, I saw it. The clinical observation had shifted. It was the look a blacksmith gives a piece of steel that has, against all odds, withstood the hammer and the fire. It wasn't affection. It was respect. I rolled onto my hands and knees then, shaking, pushed myself to my feet. I stood there, swaying but upright, as the last of my platoon staggered across the line. I had finished first. Not because I was the strongest, but because I was the most stubborn. Because quitting was a language I had never learned to speak. Later, covered in grime and aching in every cell, I sat on my footlocker and read a letter from Luke. It was full of news from his unit, but the last paragraph was the same as always. Still can't believe you're doing this, Ellie. It's a different world. Just be careful. Don't try to be a hero. Know your limits. I folded the letter carefully. He didn't get it. Not yet. Boot camp hadn't been about learning my limits. It had been about discovering that I didn't have any. The world had shrunk to the next 6 inches of dirt in front of my face, the weight of the pack digging into my shoulders like a vengeful god, and the ragged symphony of breathing from the recruits around me. 4 months. It felt like a lifetime and a single, unending minute all at once. Paris Island had carved away the soft, uncertain girl who had stepped off the bus, leaving behind something raw and sinewy. I was still 110 pounds, still 52, but the weight was different now. It was dense, packed tight with muscle, and a grim familiarity with my own limits. Limits I had been forced to cross so many times they felt like home. The crucible was the final test, 54 hours of hell designed to break you down to your most essential parts and see what was left. Sleep was a ghost, a memory we chased in 10-minute increments between events. Food was a calculated ration of fuel, eaten with dirty hands that shook with fatigue. We moved as a team, Alpha Company, a single, exhausted organism dragging itself through the swamp and the sand. "Vance, take point on the ammunition resupply," a hoarse voice croaked. It was Rodriguez, his normally broad frame seeming to sag under his own gear. His good-natured smile had been replaced by a permanent grimace of exhaustion. "You're the only one who can fit through that damn breach without getting stuck." I nodded, my neck cracking with the movement. The obstacle was a mock-up of a damaged building, the entry point a jagged hole in the faux concrete wall, barely 2 feet wide. The larger recruits had been struggling, their packs catching on the edges, costing us precious seconds. My size, the very thing Derek Bull Masterson had laughed at, the thing Luke had worried over, had become an asset. I slipped through the opening like a shadow. The wiry strength Gunny Thorne had hammered into me, allowing me to haul the heavy ammunition cans through one by one, passing them to the waiting hands of my team. This was the pattern. On the hike, when Jackson's knees buckled under the weight of the stretcher carrying our wounded squad leader, I didn't hesitate. I slid under the pole next to Rodriguez, ignoring the fire in my own legs. "I've got it, Javier, just keep pace." He looked down at me, sweat streaming down his face. "Ellie, you'll snap in half." "Just try and keep up," I grunted, adjusting the weight. My voice was low, but it carried a new authority, one earned not by volume but by relentless action. The team fell in behind us, their steps syncing with ours. I didn't give a rousing speech, I just carried the weight. That was the language they understood now. The final event on the morning of the 3rd day was the one that loomed in every recruit's mind, the obstacle course. Not the basic one we trained on for months, but the legendary, grueling final version, a gauntlet of ropes, walls, water pits, and barbed wire known simply as the Reaper. And it was haunted by a ghost, the course record, set decades ago by a young, impossibly fast gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne. It was a time spoken of in whispers, a number that seemed less a record and more a myth. We assembled before it, a line of filthy, hollow-eyed ghosts. The air was thick with humidity and dread. Gunny Thorne stood off to the side, arms crossed, his expression as unreadable as granite. He hadn't screamed at us once during the crucible. His presence was enough, a silent, judging monument to the standard we had to meet. One by one, recruits tackled the course. Some faltered at the 30-foot rope climb, arms turning to jelly. Others got tangled in the cargo net or failed to get enough momentum to clear the 7-foot wall. Rodriguez went, his power serving him well on the early obstacles but slowing him on the delicate balance beams and the swift traversal of the horizontal ladder. He finished, chest heaving, with a solid, respectable time. He gave me a thumbs up as he staggered past. Then it was my turn. The instructor with the stopwatch nodded. "Recruit Vance, on my mark." I took a deep breath, blocking out the ache in every muscle, the fog of sleep deprivation. I didn't look at Thorn. I looked at the first obstacle, the low crawl under barbed wire. My world narrowed to the sequence of movements, the path of least resistance. Marked. I was off, not with a burst of explosive speed, but with a low, efficient grace. I dropped to the dirt and slithered under the wire, my small frame allowing me to stay lower, move faster than anyone else. The mud was cool and slick against my skin. I was up and sprinting to the rope. I didn't muscle my way up. I used my legs, rapping and pushing, a technique Thorn had drilled into us until it was instinct. I was a spider, ascending in a swift, fluid motion. The horizontal ladder was next. The big recruits muscled across, hand over hand, their bodies swaying with the effort. I used my momentum, swinging my legs and launching myself forward, catching the next rung with practiced precision, my light weight making it look effortless. I could hear murmurs from the watching recruits. I didn't listen. The 7-foot wall was a challenge for me. I had to get a perfect jump, fingers catching the top lip, then kick and pull myself over. I'd failed at it countless times in training, the memory of Thorn's voice. "Your legs are pistons, Vance, use them," echoing in my mind. I hit it perfectly now, scrambling over and dropping to the other side without breaking stride. The final stretch was the Weaver, a series of high logs you had to climb over and under in a zigzag pattern. This was where agility trumped brute force. I weaved through it, a blur of motion, my body bending and twisting, using every ounce of the wiry strength I'd built hauling ammo cans and carrying stretchers. I could see the finish line. And then I saw him. Gunnery Sergeant Thorn had taken a few steps forward. He wasn't looking at the course. He was looking at his wrist, at the stopwatch he now held in his own hand. His entire focus was on the ticking numbers. Something ignited in my chest, a final reserve of energy I didn't know I had. It wasn't just about finishing anymore. It was about that look on his face, the intense, calculating stare. It was about a record set by a legend. It was about proving, once and for all, that size wasn't a measure of spirit. I pushed off the last log and launched into a flat-out sprint for the final 10 yards. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I drove them harder. I crossed the line and collapsed to my knees, gasping, the world spinning. Silence. Then the sharp click of the stopwatch. I looked up, chest heaving. The instructor was staring at his own timer, his mouth slightly agape. He looked at Thorn. Thorn was still staring at the watch in his hand, his face utterly blank. The entire field had gone quiet. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Thorn's head slowly lifted. His eyes, those laser-sharp eyes that had stripped me bare on my first day, found me. They scanned me from my muddy boots to my sweat-soaked hair. And then it happened. The stern, impenetrable facade, the mask of the perfect Marine, cracked. Not into a smile, nothing so obvious. It was a subtle shift, a relaxing of the hard lines around his mouth, a light in his deep-set eyes that wasn't criticism or disdain, but something far more powerful, pure, unadulterated respect. It was there for only a second, a fleeting breach in the fortress walls, but I saw it. I felt it like a physical blow. He walked toward me, his steps measured. He didn't say a word to me. He showed the stopwatch to the other instructor, who let out a low whistle. Thorn's gaze returned to me, the mask back in place, but the memory of that crack remained, burning in my mind. The graduation ceremony 2 days later was a surreal contrast to the mud and agony of the crucible. We stood in our crisp, new dress blue uniforms, the weight of the eagle, globe, and anchor insignia heavy and real on our collars. We were Marines. The word echoed in my head, a tangible thing. I was no longer Recruit Vance. I was Marine Vance. The sun was bright, the air clean. Families filled the bleachers, a sea of proud, smiling faces. Javier stood beside me, his chest puffed out, his grin back and wider than ever. He nudged me with his elbow. "We did it, Hermanita," he whispered. "We actually did it." I smiled back, a genuine, weary smile, but my eyes were scanning the crowd, searching for one face. I looked for the familiar set of shoulders, the skeptical but loving eyes of my brother. Luke had promised nothing. His last letter, a terse note received weeks ago, had reiterated his belief that I was making a mistake, that I belonged in college, not in the trenches. But a part of me, the little sister who still craved his approval, had hoped. had believed that this, finally, would be enough. I scanned row after row, a mother crying tears of joy, a father standing tall, his face full of pride, children waving little flags, but no Luke. The space where he should have been was a hollow ache in the center of my chest, a familiar emptiness that even the significance of the day couldn't fill. The mocking face of Bull Masterson flashed in my mind, his voice a ghost in my ear. A little thing like you, they'll eat you alive. I had proven Thorn wrong. I had proven the core wrong. But the two men who had set me on this path, one with scorn and one with skeptical love, remained unconvinced. The ceremony proceeded. Names were called. Marines marched across the stage. When my name was called, Eleanor Vance, I walked with a back straight as a rifle barrel, my steps firm on the polished deck. I saluted the commanding officer, received my diploma, and turned to leave the stage. And there, at the bottom of the steps, stood Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne. He was no longer our drill instructor. His purpose was fulfilled. Yet he stood there, blocking my path, his posture ramrod straight. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time without a trace of the fury or the calculated pressure of the past months. His gaze was clear and direct. "Vance," he said, his voice low, stripped of its parade ground volume but still carrying immense weight. He extended his hand. I took it, my own hand disappearing into his massive grip. It wasn't a bone-crushing shake, but firm, solid. A gesture between equals. "Congratulations, Marine," he said. 2 words. From him, they were worth more than any cheering crowd, any diploma. They were an absolution and a benediction. In that moment, his respect was a shield. But as I released his hand and walked back to my formation, the hollow ache returned. I had earned the title. I had earned the respect of a legend. But the journey wasn't over. Somewhere out there, beyond the pristine fences of Paris Island, I still had something to prove. The air in the anchor was thick with the smell of stale beer and fried food, a familiar funk that usually felt like a second skin. But tonight, it was suffocating. Every molecule of air seemed to be saturated with Derek Masterson's derision, and I was drowning in it. His hulking frame blocked my view of the door, a mountain of muscle and misplaced superiority. "Come on, Ellie," he rumbled, his voice a low, condescending grind. He leaned in, his bulk casting a shadow over the small space I occupied at the bar. The polished wood felt cool against my clenched fists. "A little thing like you expect me to believe you're a Marine? Did they have a special program? A kiddie core?" I kept my eyes fixed on the warped grain of the bar top, on a deep scratch that looked like a lightning bolt. It was a trick I'd learned from Thorne, from the Crucible. Find a fixed point. Anchor yourself. Don't let the chaos in. But this was a different kind of exhaustion, a soul-deep weariness that had nothing to do with sleep deprivation and everything to do with fighting the same battle in a different uniform. I'd just spent 7 months proving myself, only to come home and have it all dismissed by a man who judged worth by the pound. "I earned the title, Derek," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. It came out flat, stripped of emotion by the sheer effort of holding myself together. He laughed, a short, ugly sound that drew glances from a few patrons nearby. "Earned it? Sweetheart, I did a stint. I know what it takes. It takes size. It takes strength you don't have." He gestured vaguely at me, a sweeping motion that took in all 5'2" of me. "You're what, a $110 soaking wet? You'd blow away in a stiff breeze. They probably stuck you in an office somewhere filing paperwork. That's not being a Marine." My cheeks burned. The $110 was a new guess, and it was insultingly accurate. But it was the sweetheart that dug under my skin, the patronizing tone that reduced every drop of sweat, every aching muscle, every moment of terror and triumph on Paris Island to nothing. I thought of the rifle range, the perfect stillness I'd found, the way the world had narrowed to the sight picture, and the steady, controlled exhale. I thought of the O-course, my smaller frame and advantage as I scrambled over obstacles that larger recruits struggled with. I thought of the Crucible, of carrying Rodriguez's share of the stretcher when his shoulder gave out, my legs burning but refusing to buckle. All of it invisible to him, erased by my appearance. "It's not about size," I said, forcing the words out. "It's about heart, about not quitting." "Heart doesn't hump an 80-pound pack for 20 clicks," he scoffed, leaning closer. His breath smelled of cheap whiskey. "Heart doesn't storm a beach. That's a fairy tale they tell the weak ones to make 'em feel better. The core is about brute force, something you clearly know nothing about." I could feel the eyes of the bar on me. Curious, pitying, some amused, I was a spectacle. The little girl pretending to be a soldier, getting put in her place by the big, tough bouncer. Humiliation washed over me, hot and sharp. This was worse than any dressing down from Thorn. Thorn's fury was a forge. It was meant to shape you, to make you stronger. This was just acid, meant to dissolve. I wanted to scream. I wanted to list the records, to shout about the scores I'd posted that had surprised even the drill instructors. But the words stuck in my throat. Defending myself felt like admitting he had a point, like acknowledging that my validity was up for debate. It was. I had the eagle, globe, and anchor. I had the scar on my knee from the rope climb and the permanent calluses on my hands. They were mine. They were real. Nothing to say? Derek taunted, a smug smile spreading across his face. He thought he'd won. He thought my silence was surrender. That's what I thought. Maybe your big brother will buy you a juice box. This is no place for you. That's when the world shifted. The ambient noise of the bar, the clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation seemed to drop away, replaced by a silence that was somehow more profound. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a pressurized one, heavy with imminent authority. A voice cut through the haze, a voice I knew could strip paint from a Humvee at 50 paces. It was calm, colder than ice, and it carried an absolute, unassailable weight. Is there a problem here, recruit? My blood went cold, then hot. I didn't need to turn. I knew. The entire bar seemed to freeze. Derek's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion as he straightened up and looked past me. I turned slowly. And there he was. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorn, out of his camouflage utilities and wearing a simple, crisp polo shirt and jeans that did nothing to diminish his imposing presence. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was locked on Derek Masterson, and it held the same focused intensity he'd once used to watch us fail and succeed and fail again on the grinder. Derek, recovering some of his bravado, puffed out his chest. "This is a private conversation, pal. I'm handling a situation." Thorn took a single step forward. It wasn't a large step, but it seemed to shrink the room. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a corridor of space around him. The only situation I see is a former Army washout who couldn't complete his initial enlistment, questioning the integrity of one of my Marines. The air left the room. Derek's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "How dare you? You don't know anything about me." "I know everything I need to know, Masterson," Thorn said, his voice still dangerously quiet. He moved to stand beside me, not touching me, but his presence was a shield. I could feel the solidity of him, a rock in the swirling embarrassment. "I make it a point to know the backgrounds of men who harass my people. 2 years, wasn't it? An administrative discharge. Not quite the heroic career you're implying." Derek sputtered, "That's none of your damn business. This girl." "Her name," Thorn interrupted, the temperature in his voice dropping another 10 degrees, "is Marine Vance. You will refer to her by her title or not at all. And you were saying? Something about brute force being the only measure of a warrior." Derek, off balance and angry, doubled down. "Yeah, look at her. You're telling me she can keep up. You're telling me she's as capable as a 200-pound man? It's a joke." A slow, cold smile touched Thorn's lips. It was the most terrifying expression I had ever seen. "A joke? Interesting." He turned his head slightly, his eyes scanning the rapt audience, making them all witnesses. "You judge a Marine's worth by the scale. I judge it by the content of their service record. So let's compare, shall we, since you're so interested in capabilities." He turned his gaze back to Derek, pinning him like a specimen. During her final physical fitness test, Marine Vance ran 3 miles in 18 minutes and 12 seconds. That's a time that would place her in the top percentile of any unit in the Corps. Can you run a 3-mile in 18 minutes, Masterson? Now, ever. Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "On the rifle range," Thorn continued, his voice gaining a rhythmic, crushing momentum, "she qualified as an expert. Not just a marksman, an expert. 144 confirmed impacts out of 150 rounds fired. A score I haven't seen since I held the company record myself 20 years ago. She didn't just meet the standard. She shattered it. Have you ever held a weapon with that level of precision?" The crowd was utterly silent. I could hear the hum of the neon sign in the window. "And the crucible," Thorn said, and now his voice took on a different tone. one of grudging, absolute respect. 54 hours of continuous operations on less than 4 hours of sleep. When a member of her fire team was injured, she didn't just carry her own gear. She carried his. She took point on the resupply mission, navigating terrain in the dark that larger recruits found impassable. She didn't just keep up. She led. She persevered when men twice her size were ready to quit. He took a final step forward, until he was toe-to-toe with the larger man. Derek seemed to have shrunk, his bravado utterly deflated under the relentless, factual assault. "So you stand there," Thorne said, his voice a low, venomous whisper that carried to every corner of the silent bar. "With your bulk and your bluster, and you have the audacity to question her. To mock her. You, who never accomplished a fraction of what she has in a fraction of the time. The only joke here, Masterson, is you." It was over. There was nothing left to say. The verbal takedown was so complete, so surgically precise that Derek was left with nothing. His face was a mask of stunned humiliation. He looked from Thorne to me, and for the first time I saw not mockery but a flicker of something else, fear, and a dawning, shameful understanding. He'd been judged by a higher authority and found profoundly, publicly wanting. He turned without a word and retreated toward the back office, the crowd's eyes following him with a new, disdainful curiosity. The spell broke. Conversations slowly started to resume, hushed and speculative. Thorne finally turned to me. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a pat on the back. He just gave a single, curt nod. It was all the validation I would ever need. It was more powerful than any speech. "Gunny, I started, my voice trembling slightly. "You don't have to explain yourself to trash, Vance," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "You carry your proof with you, remember that." He glanced toward the door. "I believe your brother is here." I followed his gaze and saw Luke, standing just inside the entrance, frozen. He'd seen it all. His face was a complex map of emotions, shock, confusion, and a slow, dawning realization that was wiping away years of protective skepticism. Thorne gave me one last look, a silent communication that passed between us, a recognition forged in the heat of Paris Island. Then he turned and melted back into the crowd, as suddenly as he had appeared. I didn't wait for Luke. I needed air. I pushed through the heavy wooden door and stepped out into the cool night. The air was clean, washing away the stale bar smell. I leaned against the rough brick exterior of the building, my heart still hammering against my ribs. A moment later, the door creaked open and Luke stepped out. He stood a few feet away, shoving his hands into his pockets. The silence between us was different now. The old tension was gone, replaced by something fragile and new. "Ellie, he began, his voice rough. He shook his head, staring at the pavement. I heard what he said. Thorne, I heard all of it. I just waited, watching the cars hiss by on the wet street. "I'm sorry," he said, the words seeming to cost him something. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were different. He wasn't looking at his little sister anymore. He was looking at a peer. "I've been such an idiot. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I knew what it took. I thought you were too small." The word hung in the air, stripped of its old, negative power. "I saw you tonight," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Standing there, taking that crap from a guy like Masterson, and I was about to step in to play the big brother to tell him to back off. But you didn't need me to. You were just standing your ground. And then Thorne," he let out a low whistle. "He didn't just defend you, Ellie. He listed your accomplishments like a citation. He was proud of you." "He doesn't do proud," I murmured, a faint smile touching my lips. "He does facts." "Those facts," Luke said, shaking his head in disbelief. "An expert rifleman, the PFT scores, you never said anything." "You wouldn't have believed me," I said simply. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of the truth we'd both been living with. He nodded, accepting it. "You're right, I wouldn't have. I was still seeing the girl who used to skin her knees climbing the oak tree in the backyard. I didn't see the Marine." He stepped closer. "I see you now, Ellie, I really see you." The words healed a crack in me I hadn't even known was still there. The need for his approval, his respect, had been the silent engine driving me through the worst of it. To have it now, freely given, was a different kind of victory. It was quieter than Thorne's public vindication, but in some ways it was deeper. "It was never about being as big as you, Luke," I said, looking up at him. "It was about being strong enough, my own kind of strong." "I know that now," he said. He put a hand on my shoulder, a firm, solid grip. It wasn't protective, it was comradely. Rodriguez is going to be pissed he missed this, stuck on duty. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt good. I'll tell him all about it. He'll just say he taught me everything I know. We stood there for a while longer in the cool night, the sounds of the bar a muffled echo behind us. The neon sign of the anchor buzzed overhead, casting a red glow on the pavement. I thought about the long road from the uncertain girl who had enlisted, partly to prove her brother wrong, to the woman standing here now. The crucible hadn't ended on Paris Island. It had just changed forms. It was in the dismissive glance of a stranger, the doubt of a loved one, the quiet moments of having to reaffirm your own worth. My size hadn't been an obstacle to overcome. It was the crucible itself. It was the very thing that had forced me to dig deeper, to be smarter, to rely on a strength that wasn't measured in pounds or inches. It had forged me into something lean and hard and resilient. I wasn't just as good as the others. I was different. And in the eyes of a legend like Thorne, and finally in the eyes of my brother, that difference wasn't a weakness. It was my battle cry.